Welcome to the Executive Function for All podcast, helping people improve their executive function skills and reach their goals. Brought to you by Untapped Learning. Welcome to the Executive Function for All podcast, where we help students, parents, and educators unlock potential through better executive function skills. In today's episode, we're diving into the world of student-athlete recruiting with Amy Bryant. Amy's a former college tennis coach and the founder of Bryant College Consulting. Amy shares valuable insights on navigating the recruiting process, advocating for yourself, and building this executive function skills that transfer to college sports and beyond. Whether you're a parent, coach, or aspiring athlete, this episode is packed with practical advice for you. Let's jump in. Amy, thank you so much for joining us today. I can't tell you how excited I am to have you here and to really get your perspective. You have such a unique perspective on the student athlete side, but also like how to balance all this, which can be so overwhelming. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So just as a quick background to everyone, can you introduce yourself and who you are and
Sure.
what everything looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Amy Bryant. I coached college tennis for 23 years at Emory University, where I actually was a student athlete as well in college. I played soccer and tennis in college, and then just ended up coaching collegiate tennis for a really long time. I retired in 2022. And around the time that I retired, I started this business, Bryant College Coaching, where I help student athletes with the college recruiting process. And it's been a great journey for me. I'm really enjoying this new position and helping families find their right fit college and their right fit college sports team as well, the program and everything that goes into it. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and it's such a cool niche you've almost split out for yourself, because I think there's a misconception out there that if you just perform on the field, that people will come find you. And so I know that rocked me a little bit when I was going through the process. Can you explain how the process really works for a lot of student athletes?
Yeah, so for most student athletes, it works where the student athlete has to advocate for themselves to find the right fit versus the elite student athletes. They might not have to do much. They've been identified at a very young age, typically, and those programs come and swoop them up and recruit them. So that's a very elite, very small, minority of student athletes go that direction, while the rest of us, all of us humans, we have to really do a lot of the work ourselves. We have to create our own lists and we have to go recruit the coaches. And so that's what I really focus on in my business, is teaching student athletes and teaching families too how to advocate for themselves through this process.
And that's so essential because our specialty is ADHD and executive function skills. And one of the core deficits is this ability to self-advocate for yourself.
Correct.
Follow up with coaches. And so,
Correct.
you say you have to recruit the coaches, which I love that term. How does that look? Like, break it down for me. Let's say I'm a parent of a freshman or sophomore in high school who's showing potential in soccer.
Yes.
How would you coach me?
So first of all, we're going to take a look at the potential and what that actually means. So for example, what league are you playing, which equates to what level you're playing in high school or club soccer, and how that pathway to playing in college is going to look for you. And what I mean by that is college coaches typically have an idea in their mind of what their recruiting range is going to be. And so if you mentioned soccer, for example, if the students are playing at the highest level that their club offers, then certain college coaches would be more willing to recruit the player that's playing that top level versus a player that might be playing below. But that doesn't mean that there aren't options for the players that aren't playing at that top level. There's plenty of options there as well. And so I always like to point out that there are so many college options. But what I do with my student athletes is I make sure we're identifying the right one. So the first step in the process, that was kind of a long-winded answer to what you've asked. But the first step, again, is evaluating our level, being realistic about that. And then the second step would be creating a really targeted list that keeps in mind where we are and the likeliness of being recruited by specific programs. Now, always at the core of this process are the student athletes' goals and how they pan out academically, how they pan out athletically. So when we create that list, it's a time-consuming process because we really have to do our research to make sure that we are considering the right schools for this individual student athlete. Every search is not the same, just like every athlete is not the same. And so it's a really individualized process to go about it. And then the next phase of that process, once we've done our research and we've identified a good target list, we then move towards the advocation process, which is putting yourself out there, which is not the easiest thing for any high school student to do. It's a risky venture for sure. And saying to coaches, here I am. Could you be interested in me? And here's why you should be interested in me. So I work with the student athletes at really creating some bullet points as to why a coach should look at them so that they're confident with what they're bringing to the table. And so that includes putting together the recruiting video. That includes putting together an initial contact email. That includes talking to private and club coaches who I feel like, and even high school coaches too, who I feel like are very important ambassadors in this process. They're the ones that can communicate with college coaches and say, hey, look, I know you heard from one of my student athletes, but here's what's great about them too. And we need to teach our coaches to tell the college coaches what it is that's great about us. So all of this process goes into putting yourself out there. And then the next phase of that process is really giving it to the college coach to tell us, where do you want to take it from here? What are the next steps in the recruiting process? If they take the bait, and we do cast a wide net, if they take the bait, then it's all about them. And we can push them along the way and say, hey, I'm going to come for a visit if we haven't been invited for a visit. I'm going to come anyways, but at some point, the college coach is the one that's going to make the decision about who they want to recruit and who is a right fit for their program. We're just going to advocate for ourselves all through that process to make sure that we're getting the best look and the best opportunity possible.
And this is why I wanted to have you on. This is such good work, is because you're speaking my language with executive function coaching. You have this big goal that feels overwhelming, like get
Yes.
recruited or get a college scholarship. And there are so many different components, like you said, like talking to coaches, getting videos, and there's so many things. And breaking that down into manageable chunks, giving them a lot of love, a lot of accountability, which is what you and your coaches do, which is just so cool. And then the thing that I'm most passionate about is the skills, those transfer. Like, I'm sure you hear this from your athletes, like them learning how to talk to their coach is the same thing as getting a job or talking to a professor, other things, right?
100%. And in fact, I liken the college athletic recruiting process to your first job interview process, your first job search process. It's very, very parallel, and there's so many similarities. And athletes, in fact, have a head up, so to speak, over other graduated college students because they've been through it on the front side when they were going to college, but also they have a head up because they were college athletes. And there's so many valuable pieces to that just in and of itself that transfer over to being a great employee. So there's a lot of parallels.
Well, and even if they don't decide to do athletics in college, just simply going through this process seems very valuable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. At the end of it, exactly like you said, if they don't end up playing, they are still going to leave the process with a skill set that they did not have before, and hopefully a confidence and a self-awareness that they did not have before.
In hearing you talk to, I think about so many of our, we'll call it freshmen, I guess any high school, freshmen through seniors, the skills they need to get recruited, I don't think a lot of our students have yet. Right. And so where do you see the biggest breakdowns where you guys really need to support? What part of the process is that? Or is it just throughout the process?
Honestly, I think the most support comes at the beginning. I call it the Kickstarter, like let's do this. And for example, some of the hangups that student athletes have are with their video, for example. They don't want to send anything out unless it's perfect.
Yeah.
But you and I both know, as former athletes, we were never perfect. Yes, we had those performance highs where we had a great game, or we had, something that's really notable that other people would say, wow, they're a really good player. But we also had the bad days. That's the part of being an athlete. I mean, we're a roller coaster. It's up days and bad and down days. And so what I really see a student athlete struggling with is being okay with sending a video that's not perfect, or being okay with reaching out to a coach with a ranking that they feel like doesn't really reflect how their potential. Being average, sending an average video, quote unquote, is okay. Like,
Yeah.
as a coach who recruited for 23 years, I preferred to see one of my recruits play on an average day rather than seeing a peak for performance, because a peak performance, it's so few and far between. It's a fleeting experience that I would rather see how is this player going to perform on a regular day to day. And so, yeah, I think that the number one thing that students need my help with, and our other coaches on our team need the help with, is just getting started. Just put yourself out there. There is no cost to sending an email to a coach, right? And if you don't get a response, it doesn't really hurt,
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I think they're afraid to hear no or I'm not interested, but it doesn't hurt that badly. And so I think just being able to understand that it's okay to put yourself out there and it's okay to be told no is really all that it takes. And then once we get farther along in the process, I think that most of the support that we give there is really just validation. Here's a lot of what we do is what I call coaching translation, or translating coach speak, meaning like a student athlete will hear from a coach, get a text message from a coach, and they'll say, I'm not really sure what the coach is saying here. Does that mean they're interested? They're not interested? And I just translate it for them. Here's what I think that they're telling you, just because I've sent so many text messages, or I've sent so many emails, or I've had those difficult conversations. So I know the buzzwords for, you're our number one recruit, or you're in the middle of the pack, you're on our B list. Like, there's some ways that are a little more non-confrontational that coaches will relay that information to recruits. And I'm really good at sussing that out and supporting the student athletes as they process that information.
Yeah, well, and again, going back to how important this is long term, the amount of students I've seen who have had good work in college and are failing because they're scared to turn in because it's not perfect. They're dealing
Yes.
with perfectionism. It's been like exponentially increasing over the past few years. To be able to get over this hump with someone who's not their parents before the process begins is so important.
Yeah, I agree. I look at myself and as our team, and the business, and the philosophy behind starting my business was really like, how can we support these student athletes holistically? Not just how can we get from A to B? How can we see the end result of them getting into a college and playing on a sports team? But like, how can we support them to be successful once they get there as well?
In talking about organizational systems, because you and I both know if you do make it to the next level, the amount that's expected of you organizationally and how much it taxes these executive function skills is, to be honest, probably not developmentally appropriate. Like most 19-year-olds I know should not be balancing as much as we're expected to balance.
Right.
When you're working with your prospective student athletes, like, do you help them put in organizational systems? Like, how does that look? Because I know a lot of people have to follow up with coaches, and how do they balance all this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we do help with organizational systems. Some students are more receptive to our systems that we've created. I use Trello. I love Trello as an organizational platform, just to keep track of all the correspondences and to set deadlines for reaching out to coaches. We call them touch points. It's really important. Like, once you get on a coach's radar, how do you stay on a coach's radar? But again, it's really easy to say, oh yeah, I need to follow up with that coach in 6 weeks, and then actually remember to do it in 6 weeks. So, setting timelines and setting reminders and having a system in place. I mean, one of the things that I've noticed with student athletes recently is that none of them use a calendar. It's wild to me. But you know this from what
It's,
you're doing
it's actually
there.
not it's actually not wild to me because it's my day-to-day battle. And then
Yeah.
we keep everything in our heads and then we wonder why we're so anxious.
Well, it's like juggling balls, right? The more balls you put in your hands, at some time you're going to drop a ball. So if you have all of these times and dates and things that you have to do in your head, you're going to forget one or two of them if you don't write it down. And if you don't forecast out your week and say, okay, well, I have practice from 4 to 8 on Tuesday and Wednesday, and then I have a test on Thursday. Well, when were you planning to study? Like suddenly
Yep.
Thursday morning, you're like, oh, wait a minute, this test is here, So again, the scheduling piece is essential, especially for student athletes, because we have those chunks of time, which is also a positive. Let me tell you that, because having the chunks of time doing productive things is much better. I've seen, and there's been plenty of studies that show it's much better than having just, nothing on the calendar. There's lots more opportunities to waste time there. But again, we have to have the skill to forecast, to know when to schedule in the studying when we have the practice that's right there, glaring at us in our face every day for a certain time.
Yeah, you just hit on time blocking. And time blocking is probably the number one strategy we're using right now that's effective with college students. And what's interesting is over the past few years, I think it's due to all the social media use, is that our students, especially the ones with executive function deficits, they have to see everything,
Yes.
including time. So when,
Yes.
because time slips away from them all the time. Like if they have like an hour in between class, they'll just scroll on their phone and then they're anxious at the end of the week,
Yes.
end of the night. And so it's like showing them their time has been really helpful, which it sounds like you guys do that a lot as well.
Yeah, we do a little bit of that. And I think, again, like using Trello helps too, because it gives a nice visual of when, like, all of those conversations you've had and how they need to keep progressing and how you can push the needle to keep those conversations progressing. But again, just having that visual is, I totally agree with you. Very, very helpful.
And you also talked about putting out fires before they begin, which I know you and I would probably have saved a lot of headaches in our own life and probably added years onto our life. Seeing challenges like you have a road game on Thursday night and there's a paper due Friday.
Yeah.
Like, how do you help your student athletes see this before they're going into the fire?
Well, we definitely talk to them about what's going on in their day-to-day life. We meet with our students once a month. Some we meet with more. I wish I could meet with them all once a week, but we're strapped to, just like everyone else, strapped for time, just like our student athletes. But when we meet with them every month, we do talk about, what do you have coming up this month academically, and what do you have coming up athletically this month, and also what do you have going on personally, socially. Like, what else do you want? What are your goals here? And that's a really important part of this process. I mentioned before, like when we're creating that target list, it's like, what are your goals for college? Not only what are your goals for college, what are your goals after college? And you can have goals, but in order to reach those goals, you've got to really tackle the hows. How is this going to happen? What do I need to get through this month that I'm talking about, that I have, 2 tournaments, back-to-back weekends of travel, plus my AP history final or whatever, whatever it is? How am I going to do that? And so we've got to have systems in place. It's not enough to talk about it and to know it's there. There has to be some systems in place to get it done.
You said like my favorite word, and that's systems, right?
Yeah.
So what's an example of a system that you've seen recently that's just really worked well for a student athlete who's so busy? And I guess one I've seen is this Sunday night planning thing, where they're sitting at the kitchen table every Sunday night, they're looking at the week ahead and they're getting it all onto paper as best they can and trying to pick things off. Is there any other systems you've seen with your student athletes that have worked really well?
A new one was presented to me recently that I haven't put out for testing yet, but I really like the idea of a mind map where, again, this is like that visual thing, and I'm a visual person. Where you put down, like, instead of a list, it's just like, here's everything that's kind of going on in my brain, and then being able to see it all and then organize it from there. And so that's, I think, a little bit more helpful for some of the kids that just feel like there's so many different pieces coming into play, especially our high anxious people, but just being able to like mind dump it into this map on a piece of paper, I think will be really helpful if we start implementing it correctly.
That's actually something we do, and it's you see like the shoulders drop because
Yes,
I know most of our kids are intelligent, right? Especially the ones who seem to be struggling.
absolutely.
And the brain is for having ideas and not holding ideas. And for some reason, we're so stubborn and we just fight this thing. Like we should all just have it in our heads for some reason.
Right.
I don't know why we're so stubborn, but we are.
Well, I know. I mean, my own kids fight the Sunday night meeting, and I'm like, guys, like, I get that you're going to remember. You're going to remember it. I get
Yeah.
it. But let's put it out here. Let's put it down because honestly, your grades aren't that great, you know? And so if we want to improve the grades,
Mhm.
which it has been expressed as a goal for my personal children, how are we going to do it? And let me tell you, it needs to start with that. It needs to start with, like you said, Sunday night meeting, brain mapping, or dumping out the ideas and getting a good plan in place.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And I think a lot of times as athletes, we figure we're just so busy, we don't make the time for something like that. And it multiplies your time down the road, which I know is probably a lot of our frustrations in working with young people and the ones we see thrive. They figured out this like, how do I multiply my time because I need to? And planning is definitely one of them.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of our athletes, especially our more competitive athletes, they spend a lot of time on the road, right? They wound up having to play at the more competitive club, and I say having to, it's a choice, of course. But if you want to play against the more competitive competition, sometimes it's not right in your hometown. Sometimes you have to travel 2 towns over, or you have to, get on the expressway and you're in the car for an hour both ways going. I see the car as an opportunity. I see that as a place where a lot of great work can be done. If you can't read your psychology textbook in the car, that's fine. I get it. I get motion sickness too. Or, I need to focus better. I can't have all of this going on around me. I get that. But the car's a great time for this planning. You can plan there, and sometimes you got your parent right there driving you. You got your chauffeur, and that's what I call the parent. That's what I call myself too. But you can run ideas off of them. Like, what do you think about me getting this done at this time and here? And how can I do this? And you talk about things. The car is a beautiful time for that.
That is such a good recommendation because I always think about ways we can multiply time. For me, it was office hours with ADHD. It took me so long to get started that if I had
Yes.
that structure, like that 30 minutes by the time I got started, maintained attention, everything else, like that 30 minutes saved me an hour and a half to 2 hours. The car is
Yes.
another great one too. And for parents, a lot of times our kids are super defensive face to face. They're
Yep.
not really like that in the car a lot of times. So I love that recommendation.
Yeah. That's a good point. My kids are defensive in the car, so I'm going to push back on that. I have one that's
But
I don't know what it is about the car, but he's like, not now, not now.
I guess
But
I guess not all of them, but so I have just a few more questions for you. The first one being, as a college coach, so taking back a few years ago, as a college coach, beyond pure athletic ability, what were you looking for the student athletes who you wanted to recruit? Like, were they using certain language? Did they have certain things that maybe the other student athletes didn't?
yes, and that's a great question. So I definitely looked for the energy in a student athlete. That was really important to me. If we were going to be spending 20 hours a week together for 4 years, I wanted them to have a positive energy to them. I wanted them to have a strong work ethic. I wanted them to have that positive attitude. I always say to my student athletes and to my own children, there's only two things that you can control, and that is your attitude and your effort. You can't control when you don't make the team. You can't control when the referee makes a call. You can't control when the ball hits the net and rolls over and your opponent gets the point that you thought you deserved. You can't control any of that. But what you can control is how you react to those situations. And so for me, with recruiting, I'm always looking to see what kind of energy am I getting. And I'm not saying that in a frou-frou sense, like I'm saying that totally just like, do I want to be around this person for 4 years? And then on top of that, I'm looking for some intangibles too. Like how coachable are they? First of all, like, do they have, and I talk about growth mindset all the time, but do they have the desire to be better, not just athletically, but holistically? Like, do they want to improve? Do they want to do better in class? Do they want to, be better socially? Do they want to really make an impact on the court and on the team from a leadership perspective, or just, a teammate perspective? Like, do they have that growth mindset? And are they going to be willing to listen to my tips to get there?
Yeah, those are really valuable. I can think about a lot of the kids we work with where when you get to know them and they're so comfortable, they have all those qualities you spoke about.
Yeah.
But maybe
Yeah.
just for whatever reason they've gotten defensive and they just need to learn how to advocate and that practicing that. And so that first interaction with a coach is what they want it to be and they're putting off the right energy. I think that's such a great tip. So
Well, yeah, and we practice that with our student athletes too. Like we sit down and we do mock interviews, mock coaching calls and mock coaching in-person interviews as well, so that we can, kind of get to the heart of the matter because sometimes they're misunderstood. Sometimes they don't know how to communicate. Like it's intimidating to speak to a college coach. Even if you are the best and the most confident at your sport, at your trade, it is still really intimidating to sit there with a college coach. So we definitely break that down. I always recommend that our student athletes go into it with a list of questions for the college coach because of that intimidation factor. A lot of times what happens is they forget the questions they went in there to ask. So I always recommend that they write their questions down on a little notebook and they have them with them. And I say notebook and not cell phone because the cell phone, as we all know, we're talking about executive function skills. It's a distractor. And, we suddenly look at our phone to see what questions did I want to ask coach. And then, oh, there's 6 snaps from all my friends. And I'm forgetting that the coach is sitting right across from me, right? So I always recommend that they have their questions written out and they ask their questions. If there are things that they want to know, there is no wrong question, right? You got to understand the place that you're looking at, the place that you're exploring for your future, for your 4 years in college and your future beyond, because this is the place that springboards you for your future. We need to make sure it's the right place. So when you go into those meetings, you have to be prepared.
And this is what I've admired so much about our interactions is because what we have to do with our students. So what is essential if you have these deficits, executive function, so it's ADHD, dyslexia, anxiety, whatever. What's essential for our kids, you're doing for everybody, which is best practice, which is I love. It's like,
Yes.
let's practice how to advocate. Let's
Yes.
get you really organized because all you're talking about is organization. So when you step
Yes.
there, you are good to go. So it's like music to my ears that
Yes.
it's not like, and I think that's so important for if your student athlete does have ADHD to know that this isn't a stigmatizing thing. Like the
No,
best of the best are doing this regardless. And so
absolutely.
that's so cool and so
Absolutely.
important. For you as parents of student athletes who are listening right now, what is, the one or two recommendations that you feel like you're, giving all the time of things they can start to be doing so their students are ready for this process?
Well, let's see. I think that first and foremost, if we're getting ready for the college athletics recruiting process, I think that our student athletes need to try to get to the highest level possible for their sport. And I say that with the caveat that sometimes the highest level isn't right for our student athletes. Sometimes that's not what they want. Sometimes they want to play more recreationally and less competitively, and that's okay. So, first of all, let's understand what's right for our student athlete. If it's right for your student athlete to get into some more competitive leagues and to play against the best competition possible within your area, then that's where you're going to get the most exposure to college coaches. So you really need to look at that first. That's the first step is how do we get to places that are going to provide exposure? Now, is it a done deal if you can't get to the highest league? No, it's not. Like we said before, we have video, we have tools that we can put in front of coaches to get you looks, right? We do not need, I will say this, some of the athletic recruiting services and websites that say that they provide exposure to coaches aren't necessarily the best use of resources. So I think that I want to get across really loud and clear if possible. Like any type of exposure you're doing, you can do yourself and you can do it with the help of your high school club, college, high school club and whatever coach that you have private coach. You can get the exposure that you need, but that's got to be the first step is to get to some places where you'll have the exposure. And then from there, I would really look at your college readiness. And this goes back to the executive functioning skills that we talked about. And we have actually, I don't know if you and I ever talked about this, Brandon, but I created a collegiate student athlete readiness survey. And it evaluates you as you take it, or you as in the student athlete, on 6 really key factors. And I think having the self-awareness around these factors, and these factors are like interpersonal skills, coachability that I mentioned before, your self-motivation and self-discipline, resilience is one of them. We didn't really talk much about that, but that's a key factor for success in college. There's ups and downs. We talked about the ups and downs for sure, but in college, there are lots of them, and mom and dad aren't there to support you in college. So that's one of these key factors. And then what else do I have? Passion for your sport. That's a really important area to explore too. We talked about, is the competitive route are you ready for that? Or do you want to play more recreationally? And typically if the passion is there, you want to try to get to the highest level possible, but you can still have passion and just not like competition that much. And that's okay. But I want you to have that awareness around it so that you can make good decisions as you're going through this college process. And then, of course, the executive functioning skills. So the survey really, it just, you answer a bunch of questions and it provides a framework for growth. Again, getting back to that growth mindset so that you can communicate with your teachers, with your coaches, with your recruiting specialists, with you to say, hey, look, I was a little low in resilience. What does this exactly mean? And how can I improve upon this area before I get to college?
Yeah, that was spot on, because you spoke to so many of the positives as being a student athlete. Like most people don't talk about the positives. You spoke to developing this resilience and developing all these skills. And then, you spoke about the national recruiting websites. I know you have to be politically correct about it. I don't. Most of those are not going to get you where you want to go.
Correct.
Those are not the service that really help our student athletes. And so
correct.
Really got to put in the deep work, but you can't just throw in some video and expect all these people to find you. So
correct.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's really no database that any particular coach would say, I go there and I find all my athletes. Unless it's a really, really rural school that's very small, that isn't well known, and they absolutely need to fill a roster, coaches aren't using those sites to fill their rosters. They're going to the national events, they're going to the high regional events, they're going to all those. And I will say the other thing too is that a lot of the private camps that our student athletes get invited to also aren't necessary. So it's really important for families to know they don't have to shell out all this money. And the invitations they get or the calls they get from these recruiters, they don't have to partake in any of that, and they can still be recruited. And will have a better chance. They will have a better chance.
Thank you for saying. The non-negotiable is you have to learn how to advocate, and you have to be organized with your follow-ups and all the stuff that you
Correct. Correct.
So I highly recommend taking that survey. Could not recommend Amy more to our family. She just gets it, right? So Amy, where can everyone find you?
Awesome. Thanks for asking. So I have my website, bryantcollegecoaching.com. The website has the survey on it under the services section, the services page. There's also a link to our podcast there where I do interview coaches, college coaches, professional coaches, high school coaches, and we just talk about really important things that parents need to know. And I will say also, we have our first book coming out. It is a a guidebook for parents for youth parents, for high school parents, for college parents on how best to support their student athletes. So that comes out in January. If anyone's interested, just shoot me a message. I'll make sure you're one of the first to receive it. It's just a little ebook with some important tips and things that can help you as you go about the process.
I had no idea you're writing a book. Congratulations. I bet it's going to be phenomenal. So thank you again for being here, and so grateful to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was awesome.
Thank you for joining us on the Executive Function for All podcast. If today's episode brought you any value, please rate us 5 stars and share it with someone who may benefit. And remember, every small step you take builds towards your success. For resources and guidance, visit untappedlearning.com. Keep growing, keep learning, and we'll see you next time.